The courtroom was silent as the gavel struck. Guilty, the judge declared, sealing Officer Daniel Reed's fate. A once respected police officer, dedicated to justice, now branded a criminal. Shackled, betrayed, and framed for a crime he didn't commit, Daniel's world collapsed around him. But amidst the whispers, flashing cameras, and crushing injustice, one pair of unwavering eyes watched him, his loyal K9 partner. Shadow. What happened next would shock the world. As Shadow's keen instincts uncovered a hidden truth, a buried recording that revealed the real criminals, Daniel's fight for justice was reignited. What began as a desperate plea for innocence turned into a relentless battle against deep-seated corruption. With the help of his fearless K9 companion and a few trusted allies, Daniel exposed a web of lies that reached the highest levels of power. But those who built this empire of deceit weren't going down without a fight. Part 1: The Fall of Officer Daniel Reed. The gavel slammed against the wooden desk, the sound reverberating through the eerily silent courtroom. Guilty, the judge's voice rang out, sealing Daniel Reed's fate. The decorated police officer, who had dedicated over 15 years to upholding justice, sat frozen in disbelief, his hands shackled before him. He had spent his entire career fighting crime, protecting the innocent, and risking his life for the people he swore to serve. And now, those very people had turned against him. Despite his repeated pleas of innocence, the jury had delivered a verdict that felt like a death sentence. The air in the courtroom grew thick with tension. Reporters whispered among themselves, their cameras flashing to capture the fall of a once respected officer. But nothing, not the judge's words, nor the cold bite of the metal cuffs around his wrists, hurt Daniel more than the sight of his K9 partner, Shadow, sitting at the back of the courtroom. The powerful German shepherd, trained to detect deception, danger, and narcotics, locked eyes with his handler. His ears were erect, his posture tense, as if sensing the deep injustice in the air. To Shadow, Daniel was not just a handler, he was his partner, his protector, his family. Daniel swallowed hard, the lump in his throat growing. The idea of being separated from Shadow was far worse than the prison sentence itself. As the judge rose to leave, Daniel's voice broke the silence. "Your Honor," he called out, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "I have one final request before they take me away. Please, let me say goodbye to my K9 partner." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The request was unexpected. Judges weren't in the habit of granting favors to convicted criminals. But as the room fell silent again, the judge studied Daniel for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he nodded. 3 minutes, he said. The second Shadow was released. The German shepherd bolted across the courtroom. His nails clattered against the floor, his powerful body cutting through the tension like a bullet. As soon as Shadow reached Daniel, he jumped up, his paws pressing against his handler's chest, letting out a soft whimper. "I'm so sorry, buddy," Daniel choked, wrapping his arms tightly around the dog. "I let you down." Shadow let out a low, deep whine, a sound Daniel had never heard from him before. And then, something changed. The dog suddenly stiffened, his nose twitching violently as he pressed against Daniel's chest. His ears flicked, his nostrils flaring as he picked up something hidden. Then, in a swift motion, Shadow clamped his teeth around the fabric of Daniel's jacket and pulled hard. Rip! The fabric tore, revealing a small metallic object tucked into the inner lining. The entire courtroom gasped. A recording device, one that Daniel had never seen before, fell to the ground with a sharp clatter. The tension in the room exploded. "What the hell is that?" the judge demanded, his face twisting into a mixture of confusion and suspicion. One of the officers in the room stepped forward cautiously, picking up the device. His fingers trembled as he held it up for all to see. The prosecutor's face went pale. "Activate it," the judge ordered. The officer hesitated, then pressed the play button. A burst of static filled the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of voices. Then, clear as day, a deep, gruff voice spoke. "Just plant the evidence. No one's going to question it. Reed's got a clean record, he's the perfect scapegoat." The room exploded in chaos. Gasps, shouts, whispers, everyone reeled from the revelation. Daniel felt his heart stop. He knew that voice. Captain Raymond Holt. His own supervisor. His mentor. The man he had trusted with his life. The judge slammed his gavel down hard, demanding order. "This trial is not over," he declared. "Guards, secure that recording as new evidence. We are reopening this case immediately." For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt something stir in his chest. Hope. He turned to Shadow, who still stood protectively at his side, his body tense, his keen eyes watching everything. Daniel reached out, placing a hand on the dog's strong neck. "You just saved me, boy." Shadow didn't bark, didn't wag his tail. He just stood there, unwavering. And in that moment, Daniel knew. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Part 2, The Web of Lies. The air inside the courthouse felt suffocating. Tension coiled like a tightened spring, ready to snap at any moment. As the last echoes of the damning recording faded, the weight of the revelation settled over the courtroom like a suffocating fog. Officer Daniel Reed, still shackled, sat frozen in disbelief. The voice on the recorder, his former mentor and commanding officer, Captain Raymond Holt, had just unknowingly exposed his own corruption. And yet, Daniel felt no victory. Only rage. This man, a leader he once trusted, had carefully orchestrated the destruction of his career, his freedom, his entire life. For what? What had Daniel uncovered that was so dangerous, so threatening, that he had to be silenced? Beside him, Shadow, his loyal K9 partner, remained rigid, his sharp brown eyes locked onto the judge as if demanding action. The dog's ears twitched as murmurs rippled through the courtroom. People were finally beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. Then, the judge spoke. "Bailiffs, return the defendant to holding. We will reconvene once I have reviewed this new evidence." His voice carried no hesitation, no uncertainty. The recording had changed everything. Daniel barely had time to process what was happening before he felt hands on his shoulders. The guards, though gentler than before, escorted him out of the courtroom. He glanced back, his eyes finding Shadow, who was now being pulled away by another officer. A fresh wave of panic surged through him. "Wait!" Daniel turned sharply, his chains clinking. "Shadow stays with me." The judge hesitated, then exchanged a look with one of the officers. "The K9 will be placed in Officer Sarah Lawson's care until further notice," he ruled. Daniel's pulse pounded. Sarah Lawson. She had been one of his closest allies in the department. If anyone could be trusted to look after Shadow, it was her. Still, as Shadow was led in the opposite direction, the feeling of being torn away from his only ally settled like a crushing weight in Daniel's chest. The holding cell. Hours later, Daniel sat in a cold, dimly lit holding cell. His back against the concrete wall, replaying everything over and over in his mind. Shadow's instincts had just uncovered the truth, but one piece of evidence wasn't enough. Daniel knew Holt. The man didn't act alone. How deep did this corruption go? His thoughts were interrupted when the heavy metal door creaked open. Sarah Lawson stepped in, her expression unreadable. A set of files rested in her arms, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "We need to talk." Daniel sat forward, his shackled hands resting on his knees. "Tell me you have something," he said, his voice rough. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small, setting it on the metal table between them. A worn envelope. Daniel frowned as she slid it toward him. "I found this in your locker." His stomach tightened. "My locker?" he repeated. "I haven't touched it in weeks." Sarah nodded. "Exactly." But Shadow wouldn't stop sniffing around it. When I opened it, Daniel slowly tore the envelope open with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs. And not just any photographs. Grainy, black and white images of Captain Holt meeting with known criminals. Daniel's blood ran cold. "Holt is working with them," Sarah confirmed. These images were taken at an abandoned warehouse near the docks. "We cross-checked the locations with recent police busts. Turns out, all the cases Holt closed in the past year have ties to the same criminal syndicate." Daniel clenched his jaw. He had always suspected something was off. Too many cases had been dismissed without proper investigation. Too many criminals walked free despite overwhelming evidence. And now, here was the proof. Holt wasn't just covering up crimes, he was facilitating them. Sarah let out a slow breath. "This isn't just about framing you. This is bigger. A lot bigger." Daniel forced himself to stay calm. "Do we have anything else?" Sarah's expression darkened. "Not enough to bring him down yet. But..." She hesitated. "Shadow just found us something else." Daniel's head snapped up. "Where is he?" Sarah glanced toward the door. "With me. But you won't believe what he uncovered." She opened another file, flipping it toward Daniel. It was a bank statement, with a massive, untraceable payment deposited into Holt's personal account. A race against time. Daniel leaned forward, his mind working overtime. "We need more." Sarah nodded. "I agree. And if Shadow's instincts were right once, they'll be right again." Daniel exhaled sharply. "So what's the plan?" Sarah met his gaze. "We get you out of here." Daniel stared at her. "Sarah, you know as well as I do that I can't just walk out." She gave him a knowing smirk. "You don't have to. We just need to stall long enough for the truth to unravel. And I know exactly where to start." Her confidence ignited something inside him, the spark of the fighter he used to be. For the first time since his arrest, Daniel felt something other than despair. He felt ready. Ready to expose the truth. Ready to take back his life. Ready to finish what Shadow had started. Meanwhile, elsewhere. At that exact moment, Captain Raymond Holt sat in his office. His fingers wrapped tightly around his phone. His jaw clenched as he listened to the news from inside the courthouse. The trial wasn't over. The recording had surfaced. Daniel wasn't going down quietly. Holt's pulse quickened. He had spent years building this empire, and it was all crumbling because of a damn dog. He couldn't let that happen. Pressing a number into his phone, he spoke in a low, dangerous tone. "We have a problem. Take care of it." There was a brief pause on the other end. Then the voice replied, "Consider it done. The battle is just beginning." As Sarah left Daniel's holding cell that night, Shadow suddenly tensed, his ears perking, his body stiffening. Daniel saw it immediately. Something was coming. And deep in his gut, he knew it wasn't good. Whatever was about to happen, they were running out of time. Part 3, The Breakout. A dangerous shift in the air. Inside the dimly lit holding facility, Daniel Reed paced his small cell, his mind a battlefield of thoughts. The revelations Sarah had brought him, the proof of Holt's corruption, the illegal money transfers, the staged convictions, it was all enough to bring down an empire. But there was one problem. They still didn't have enough leverage to make it airtight. And Holt? He wouldn't go down without a fight. Daniel had felt it in the courtroom when the recording had played. That man wasn't panicking. He was calculating. What was he planning? As if answering his thoughts, Shadow, who had been placed in Sarah's temporary custody, began barking furiously in the adjacent K9 holding area. Daniel's gut twisted with unease. Shadow had the kind of instincts that never failed him before. Something was coming. Something bad. The heavy metal door to the holding area swung open. And Sarah rushed in, her face grim with urgency. "We need to move. Now." Daniel narrowed his eyes. What happened? Sarah quickly unlocked the cell, lowering her voice. "Holt's making his move. Someone inside the department just authorized an emergency transfer. You're being sent to a different facility tonight." Daniel's stomach dropped. That doesn't make any sense. Sarah met his gaze, her expression confirming his worst fears. Because it's not a real transfer. It's a setup. The setup. Daniel's pulse pounded as they hurried down the dim corridors of the station. Sarah had managed to pull some strings. She couldn't officially release him, but she had been given access to escort him for questioning before the transfer. If they didn't move fast, this would be his last night alive. "Where's Shadow?" Daniel demanded as they walked. "In my car, waiting," Sarah replied, eyes flicking around. Daniel nodded, his body moving on pure survival instinct. Everything had changed. This wasn't just about proving his innocence anymore. It was about staying alive long enough to expose the truth. But as they turned a corner, they froze. Four uniformed officers stood blocking the exit. The one in front, Detective Gregson, Holt's second in command, smirked coldly. "Going somewhere, Reed?" Daniel's jaw clenched. They had been expecting this. The fight for survival. Sarah moved first. "Step aside, Gregson. He's coming with me for questioning." Gregson's smirk widened. "That's funny. Because I just got an order saying he's being moved to an external holding facility. No questioning required." Daniel scoffed. "You mean a hit job?" Gregson's expression darkened, and he reached for his weapon. "I don't know what you're talking about, but you're coming with us." Everything slowed. Daniel saw Sarah tense beside him, her hand hovering over her own weapon. Gregson and the three officers behind him were all armed, trained, and outnumbered them 2 to 4. It didn't matter. Daniel wasn't going with them. The moment Gregson's hand fully wrapped around his gun, Daniel moved. Years of police training kicked in as he lunged, grabbing the detective's wrist and slamming his elbow into the man's throat. Gregson stumbled backward, choking, and Sarah fired a warning shot into the ceiling, a loud crack that made the other officers flinch. "Stand down," she barked. The momentary distraction was all Daniel needed. He grabbed Gregson's gun and slammed the butt of it against his temple, knocking him out cold. The other officers recovered quickly, but Daniel was already on the move. Sarah grabbed his wrist. "Run!" And they did. The escape. They burst through the back entrance of the station, their lungs burning as they sprinted through the parking lot. Sarah's car was parked by the exit. Engine already running. And in the passenger seat, waiting, was Shadow. As soon as the German Shepherd saw Daniel, he barked furiously, his tail wagging. Daniel threw open the door and jumped in. Sarah following close behind. The moment the door shut, Sarah slammed the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as they sped out of the lot, bullets ricocheting off the back bumper as Holt's men rushed outside. Weapons drawn. But it was too late. They were gone. And Daniel was finally free. For now. Regrouping at the safe house, After an hour of driving, Sarah pulled into a small cabin deep in the woods, a safe house they had used on undercover assignments in the past. Daniel stumbled out of the car, his heart still racing from the escape. Shadow immediately bounded toward him, pressing his nose against Daniel's chest as if to reassure himself that his partner was okay. Daniel knelt down, gripping Shadow's fur tightly. "You saved my life again, buddy." Shadow licked his face, letting out a soft whimper. Sarah stood nearby, arms crossed, watching. "We need to move fast. Now that Holt knows you're loose, he'll send people after us." Daniel exhaled, standing. "Do we have enough evidence to bring him down yet?" Sarah hesitated. "Not yet. But we're close." Daniel's fist clenched. "Then we finish this. The hunt begins." The next 48 hours were a blur of strategy, digging, and constant movement. Sarah and Daniel pieced together the remaining files, tracing Holt's illegal transactions back to a powerful network of criminals, men who owned the department from the shadows. And the final piece? Shadow had led them straight to it. The German Shepherd had once again picked up a scent, this time in one of Holt's abandoned warehouses, leading them to a hidden ledger with names, bribes, and transactions proving Holt had been orchestrating crime from the inside. They had everything. All they needed now was to expose it. The final play. Daniel and Sarah worked tirelessly to send the evidence to the only people they could trust, an independent federal investigator and a whistleblower journalist who had been uncovering corruption in the city for years. Once the files were sent, Daniel exhaled deeply. "It's done." Sarah met his gaze. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Daniel looked down at Shadow. The dog sat beside him, his intelligent eyes filled with an unshakable trust. Daniel reached down, scratching Shadow's ears. "I was born ready. The beginning of the end." 3 days later, news broke. Holt's entire operation was exposed. Corrupt officers were arrested. The city exploded with headlines about the biggest police scandal in decades. And Captain Holt? He was nowhere to be found. Daniel watched the news from the safe house, his jaw tightening. Holt was running. But Daniel knew one thing for sure. They weren't finished yet. Because before this ended, he would find Holt. And he would end this himself. Part 4, The Final Chase. A city on fire. The city was in chaos. The news of Holt's corruption had exploded across every major network, shaking the police force to its core. Officers who had once blindly followed orders now questioned everything. Investigations were launched, suspects were interrogated, and high-ranking officials were suddenly scrambling to save themselves. But one thing was still missing. Holt himself. Despite the arrest warrants, despite the evidence damning him beyond redemption, he had vanished. No one could find him. No one had seen him. Daniel Reed knew better. Holt wasn't hiding. He was planning. And Daniel wasn't about to let him make another move. The trail goes cold. The safe house was quiet except for the hum of Sarah's laptop. She had been working non-stop for the past 2 days. Digging through financial records, call logs, and police reports, anything that could give them a lead on Holt's whereabouts. Daniel sat at the small wooden table, his fingers idly scratching behind Shadow's ears. The German Shepherd was alert, eyes constantly shifting toward the windows, as if sensing that the fight wasn't over yet. "Any movement?" Daniel asked. Sarah shook her head, frustrated. Holt's wiped everything. His accounts, his known safe houses, even his burner phones. It's like he disappeared off the grid. Daniel clenched his jaw. He's out there. And he's not done. Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "We need something more." A crack in his armor, a mistake. Before she could finish, Shadow's ears perked up sharply. His body tensed. Daniel's instincts kicked in. "What is it, boy?" A second later, a phone buzzed on the table. Sarah grabbed it, her face going pale as she read the message. It was from an unknown number. "You think you won? You're still missing the biggest piece. Come find me, Reed. If you're man enough." Daniel's blood ran cold. Sarah's hands shook as she looked up at him. It's him. Holt was challenging him. And Daniel wasn't about to back down. The meeting point. The coordinates in the message led them to an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city, one of Holt's former warehouses, now boarded up and forgotten. Daniel knew this was a trap. But he also knew he didn't have a choice. Sarah gripped the steering wheel as she pulled the car to a stop a few blocks away. "This is insane. We should call for backup." "No," Daniel interrupted, his tone firm. "Holt still has people in the department. If we call backup, he'll disappear before they even get here." Sarah gritted her teeth, clearly torn. "Then we go together." Daniel shook his head. "I go in first. You cover me from a distance. If things go south, you get this evidence to the feds." She exhaled sharply, then nodded. "Fine. But if I hear a single gunshot, I'm coming in." Daniel turned to Shadow, who was sitting in the back seat, perfectly still, waiting. Daniel reached out and ruffled the dog's fur. "You ready, boy?" Shadow's tail gave a single, steady wag. He was always ready. Into the lion's den. Daniel moved carefully through the crumbling structure, Shadow at his side. Every step echoed against the metal walls, the smell of rust and oil thick in the air. The deeper they went, the heavier the silence became. Then, from the shadows, a voice. "Glad you could make it, Reed." Daniel turned the corner and saw him. Holt stood calmly in the center of the open warehouse floor, his hands in his pockets, a smug smirk on his face. Behind him, a group of armed men spread out, forming a loose semicircle. It was exactly what Daniel expected. A final showdown. "End of the road, Captain," Daniel said, his voice steady. "It's over." Holt chuckled. "Is it?" He gestured lazily around the room. "You're outnumbered, Reed. You really think you're walking out of here?" Daniel didn't blink. "You don't know me very well." "Then." Shadow growled. Low. Deep. A warning. Something shifted in Holt's expression. An instant of hesitation. Daniel moved first. The fight begins. In a blur of motion, Daniel lunged left, drawing his weapon just as Holt's men opened fire. The factory exploded with gunshots, the sharp cracks reverberating through the steel beams. Shadow dove forward, his powerful frame launching at one of the guards, taking him down instantly. Daniel dropped to cover, firing back with precise, controlled shots. Two of Holt's men went down, but the others kept advancing. A voice crackled over the radio in Daniel's ear. "I'm moving in," Sarah's voice came through. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Not yet. Too late." A moment later, gunfire erupted from the second floor. Sarah had taken a sniper position, pinning down Holt's men and forcing them into cover. Holt, now alone in the center of the chaos, snarled and pulled his own weapon. Daniel saw his chance. He charged. The final blow. Holt fired twice, both shots missed. Daniel slammed into him, knocking the gun from his hands. The two men hit the ground hard, grappling for control. Holt was strong, but Daniel was angry. The fight was brutal. Fists slammed into ribs, knuckles collided with jaws, and for a moment, the world blurred into raw survival. But Daniel had one advantage. he wasn't fighting alone. As Holt tried to reach for a knife strapped to his belt, Shadow lunged, clamping his powerful jaws onto Holt's arm. Holt screamed. Daniel tore the knife away, flipped Holt over, and pinned him face down on the ground. "It's over," Daniel growled, pressing his knee against the captain's back. Holt spat blood onto the floor. "You think this changes anything?" Daniel leaned in. "No. But this does." From behind him, Sarah stepped forward, holding up her phone. The screen was live streaming to the entire police department. Everyone had seen everything. Holt's face went pale. It was over. For real this time. Justice, finally. Holt was dragged away in handcuffs the next morning, his face splashed across every newspaper in the country. The entire criminal web collapsed, with dozens of officers, politicians, and business moguls being arrested. And Daniel? His name was cleared. But there was one last thing he had to do. A partner's loyalty. Days later, Daniel and Sarah stood outside the K-9 unit, watching as Shadow played in the yard. A handler approached, clipboard in hand. "Shadow's officially retired from duty," he said, handing Daniel the papers. "After everything he's done, he deserves a real home." Daniel took the papers, smiling. "He's already got one." He knelt down, scratching behind Shadow's ears. "What do you say, buddy? Ready to come home?" Shadow wagged his tail, pressing his nose against Daniel's chest. The answer was clear. They had been through hell together. And now, for the first time in years, they were free. Together. Lessons in loyalty, justice, and redemption. The story of Daniel and Shadow is more than just an intense battle for justice, it's a testament to the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. The power of perseverance, and the strength of integrity in the face of corruption. Key takeaways. Loyalty never wavers. Shadow stood by Daniel through every hardship, proving that true loyalty isn't bound by rules or circumstances. Whether human or animal, a strong bond transcends time and trials. The truth always comes to light, no matter how deep corruption runs, lies will never outlast the truth. Daniel was framed, betrayed, and nearly silenced, but his perseverance brought justice. Courage is standing up when no one else will. The easiest path is to stay silent, but the right path requires bravery. Daniel and Sarah risked everything to expose the truth, reminding us that one voice can change everything. Second chances matter. Even after everything was taken from him, Daniel didn't let anger consume him. Instead, he used his experience to fix a broken system. Just like Shadow found a new life outside the force, we all deserve a chance to heal and rebuild. Justice is worth fighting for, in a world where power can be abused. Standing up for what's right is never easy. But those who fight for justice leave a lasting impact, making the world safer and better for future generations. Your voice matters, join the conversation. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. What part of the story moved you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Do you believe in the power of loyalty and justice? Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that truth and integrity always win. Like this video if you believe in standing up for what's right. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible, heartwarming, and inspiring real-life stories that will remind you of the power of courage, compassion, and resilience. Every share, like, and comment helps us reach more people and continue bringing powerful stories to light. Thank you for being part of our amazing community. Together, we can make a difference.